To remove the access panel, first loosen the thumb screw at the rear of the panel that secures the panel to the PC. Grasp the handle on the panel and pull towards the back of the PC to release the panel. Pull the panel away from the PC. The access panel has several tabs on its top, bottom, and leading edges, which fit into slots and over the front lip of the PC. To replace the panel, align the tabs on the panel over the corresponding slots on the PC, then slide the panel forward to lock it into position. Tighten the thumb screw to secure the panel to the PC. To remove the optical drive, first remove the access panel. Detach the power and data connectors from the back of the drive. Press on the black drive release latch at the top of the drive and slide the drive out the front of the drive bay. To replace the optical drive, slide the drive into its drive bay through the front of the PC, latch side up, until the black release latch snaps into place. Replace the power and data connectors to the drive. To remove the front bezel, first remove the access panel and the optical drive. Unlatch the 3 side tabs of the front bezel. And rotate the bezel away from the PC. The front bezel has 3 tabs on each side. Which fit into 6 slots on the PC. To replace the front bezel, align the tabs on the right side of the bezel into the slots on the PC, then rotate the bezel into position. Snap it firmly into place. To remove the hard drive cage, first remove the access panel, the optical drive, and the front bezel. Disconnect the power and data connectors from the hard drive. Disengage the hard drive connectors from the cable guide on the bottom of the cage. Detach the 2 silver Torx head screws on the front of the unit that help secure the drive cage to the PC, as well as the single Torx head screw securing the cage to the side wall of the PC. Carefully pull the cage into and then out of the unit. The drive cage has 2 slots at the top and bottom that slide over tabs on the side wall of the PC. To replace the drive cage, align the slots over their tabs and slide forward until the cage is correctly seated. Replace the single Torx head screw to secure the hard drive cage to the side wall of the PC. Replace the 2 Torx head screws at the front of the PC to fully secure the drive cage. Replace the drive cage connectors into the cable guide on the bottom of the drive cage. Connect the power and data connectors to the hard drive. To remove the hard drive, first remove the access panel, the optical drive, the front bezel, and the drive cage. Detach the 4 silver Torx head screws that secure the 3.5-inch drive to the drive cage. Slide the drive out of the hard drive cage. To install a 3.5-inch hard drive, position the hard drive spindle side out against the hard drive cage, aligning the screw holes on the drive with the screw holes marked A on the hard drive cage. Secure the hard drive to the drive cage with its 4 silver Torx head screws. To remove the front I/O panel, first remove the access panel, the optical drive, and the front bezel. Detach the front I/O connectors from the motherboard. Free the connectors from the cable guide on the side wall of the PC. Detach the 4 Torx head screws that secure the front I/O to the front of the unit. Pull the front I/O panel and its connectors out the front of the unit. The front I/O panel has a tab at its bottom edge that aligns behind the bottom of the cutout at the front of the chassis for correct placement. There are also 2 small cutouts on the front I/O panel that align over small locator pegs at the front of the PC. To reinstall the front I/O panel, first feed the front I/O connectors in through the cutout at the front of the unit. Align the bottom tab of the front I/O panel behind the cutout and press the front I/O panel into place. Secure the front I/O panel to the PC with its 4 Torx head screws. Secure the connectors for the front I/O into their cable guide on the side wall of the PC. Reattach the connectors that run from the front I/O panel to the motherboard. To replace system memory, first remove the access panel. Simultaneously push down on the clips on either side of the DDR4 DIMM socket to release the memory module. Carefully pull out the memory module. There is 1 notch on the bottom of every DDR4 DIMM module, offset from the center, that fits over a tab in the DDR4 DIMM memory socket. When installing DDR4 DIMMs, align the notch on the module with the tab in the socket. Press the module into the socket until the clips on both sides of the socket lock into place. To replace the wireless LAN board, first remove the access panel. In some units, you may need to remove the optical drive, the front bezel, and the drive cage as well for access to the wireless LAN board. Detach the wireless LAN antennas from the wireless LAN board. Detach the Phillips number 1 screw for the wireless LAN board. The board will pop up. Remove the board. There is a notch on the side edge of the wireless LAN board that aligns over a key in the wireless LAN board socket on the motherboard. To replace the wireless LAN board, align the board at a 30-degree angle into its socket, engaging the notch on the board with its socket key. Press down on the board. Hold it down while replacing the Phillips number 1 screw. Replace the wireless antennas to the wireless LAN board. The antennas are labeled 1 and 2 and should be attached to the corresponding numbered ports on the board label. To remove the wireless LAN antennas, first remove the access panel, the optical drive, the front bezel, and the drive cage. Detach the antennas from the wireless LAN card. Free the antennas from the cable guide on the side wall of the PC. Pull the antennas out the front of the unit through their access hole. Remove the antennas from the cable guides on the front face of the PC. Carefully pry off each antenna's adhesive. Slide the antenna up and remove the antenna from the PC. There is a small tab on both edges of each antenna that fit into small cutouts on the front of the PC. Each antenna is labeled 1 or 2. There are 1 and 2 stencils on the front of the PC to indicate the location of each antenna. To replace the antennas, insert the tab edges into their cutouts. Slide the antenna into place. Then press the antenna adhesive down to the front of the PC. Place the antennas into their cable guides on the front of the PC. Feed the antennas into the inside of the unit through their access hole. Route the antennas into their cable guide on the side wall of the PC. Reattach the antennas to the wireless LAN board. The antennas are labeled 1 and 2 and should be attached to the corresponding labeled ports on the board. To remove the power supply, first remove the access panel, the optical drive, the front bezel, and the drive cage. Then detach the 2 power supply connectors to the motherboard. Note each connector has a latch that must be squeezed to detach the connector. Free the 4-pin power connector from the plastic cable guide on the top inside wall of the PC. Free the power connectors from underneath other system connectors. Next, detach the 4 Torx head screws that connect the power supply to the PC. press the latch at the inside edge of the power supply in the unit and slide the power supply into the PC before fully removing it from the unit. Always replace the entire power supply. Never attempt to work within the power supply unit. There is a guide inside the PC that indicates the position of the power supply. There is also a tab near the latch on the inside of the PC that slides into a slot on the side of the power supply. To replace the power supply, align the power supply with the AC port towards the open side of the PC, then slide the power supply towards the rear of the unit until it locks into place next to the latch. Reattach the 4 Torx head screws at the rear of the chassis to secure the power supply. Route the power supply connectors under other system connectors. Replace the 4-pin power supply connector into the cable guide on the top wall of the PC. Reconnect the power connectors to the motherboard. To remove the power switch, first remove the access panel, the optical drive, the front bezel, and the drive cage. Detach the power switch connector from the motherboard. Remove the connector from the metal cable guides on the side wall of the PC if the connector is routed into guides. Press hard on the left side of the power switch to disengage the hooked tab on that side. Then pull the power switch and its connector out the front of the unit. The power switch has hooked tabs on both sides. That fit into small cutouts at the front of the chassis. To reinstall the power switch, first feed the connector in through its access hole at the front of the unit. Align the right side tab into its cutout, then squeeze and press the left hooked tab into its cutout until the power switch is secure. Route the power switch connector into the appropriate cable guides for the motherboard installed in the unit. Reattach the power switch connector to the motherboard. To remove the heatsink from a unit with an Intel CPU-based motherboard, first remove the access panel. Detach the heatsink connector to the motherboard. Loosen the 4 captured Torx head screws for the heatsink. Gently pull the heatsink out of the PC. Before replacing the heatsink into the system, first clean off the old thermal grease from the microprocessor. As well as from the heatsink. Apply new thermal grease or a thermal pad to the microprocessor. Replace the heatsink connector to the motherboard first to ensure correct positioning of the heatsink. Align the 4 screws of the heatsink over the 4 screw holes on the motherboard. Tighten the 4 Torx head heatsink screws. To remove the CPU in a unit with an Intel CPU-based motherboard, first remove the access panel and the heatsink. Press down to release the CPU load lever from its retention tab, and pull the load lever and load plate away from the socket. Identify pin 1 on the socket by the mark on the corner of the socket stencil. Line up the pin 1 corner of the Intel CPU removal replacement tool over the socket. Press down on the plunger of the removal tool to pick up the CPU from the socket and remove the tool and the CPU from the motherboard. To replace the CPU, first identify pin 1 position on the microprocessor by noting the yellow mark on the corner of the chip assembly. Make sure the Intel CPU staging tool side pins are set to the correct socket type for the CPU. For this unit, it is LGA1151. Place the CPU into the Intel CPU staging tool. When correctly inserted, the small notches on the side of the CPU should align over the side pins on the staging tool. Place the removal replacement tool over the stage, lining up the pin 1 triangles on each tool. Press down on the removal replacement tool to pick the CPU up from the stage. Align the removal replacement tool again to pin 1 on the motherboard CPU socket. Press the plunger on the removal replacement tool to release the CPU into the socket. Swing the load plate down. Lock the load lever under its retaining tab to secure the microprocessor into place. CMOS factory settings should be restored as a first step before replacing the system motherboard. To restore CMOS factory settings, first remove the access panel. Remove the battery from the motherboard. Wait 30 seconds. Replace the battery to the motherboard. CMOS factory settings are now reset. Note that you will now need to enter System BIOS and reset the clock in BIOS after this procedure. To remove the motherboard from units with a full-size Intel CPU-based motherboard, first remove the access panel, the optical drive, the front bezel, and the drive cage. Remove system memory and the wireless LAN board. Remove the heatsink and the CPU. When removing the Intel CPU, install a socket cover on the load plate window before replacing the load plate over the socket. Detach all connectors to the motherboard. Remove the 4 Torx head screws that attach the motherboard to the PC. Carefully pull out the motherboard. Place the motherboard in an anti-static bag. To replace the motherboard, Carefully place the motherboard in the unit, clearing connectors away from underneath the sides of the board, and aligning the back panel connectors with their cutouts on the rear of the chassis. Replace the 4 Torx head screws to secure the motherboard to the unit. Replace all connectors to the motherboard. To remove the motherboard from a unit with a micro ATX motherboard, first remove the access panel. Remove system memory and the wireless LAN board. Detach all connectors to the motherboard. Remove the 4 Torx head screws that attach the motherboard to the PC. Carefully pull out the motherboard. Remove the heatsink from the motherboard after the motherboard is removed from the unit. Place the motherboard in an anti-static bag. To install a micro ATX AMD motherboard, first replace the heatsink to the motherboard while the motherboard is still out of the unit. Carefully place the motherboard in the unit, clearing connectors away from underneath the sides of the board and aligning the back panel connectors with their cutouts on the rear of the chassis. Replace the 4 Torx head screws to secure the motherboard to the unit. Replace all connectors to the motherboard. To remove the heatsink from units with a micro ATX AMD CPU-based motherboard, first remove the access panel and the motherboard. Detach the heatsink fan connector to the motherboard. Squeeze the 4 posts for the heatsink on the underside of the motherboard, using pliers to release each post while pulling out on the heatsink. Pull the heatsink off of the motherboard. Before replacing the heatsink into the system, first clean off the old thermal grease from the microprocessor as well as from the heatsink. Apply new thermal grease or a thermal pad to the microprocessor. To replace the heatsink, press the spring-loaded posts into their holes on the motherboard until the bottom pokes through the bottom side of the motherboard and they are secure. Replace the heatsink fan connector to the motherboard.